Hello everyone, this is Grandmaster Josh Friedel, and today I'm doing the Games You Should Know by Heart lecture. So last week I did a game between, probably a lesser known game, between Greg Serper and Ioannis Nikolaitis. And so that one I say most of you probably hadn't seen, but again, one of my favorite games. This game I'd say is definitely more famous. It's played between two elite players of the time. So this was played in 1991. It was in their candidates match. They had actually tied the match. It was between Vassily Ivanchuk and Artur Yusupov. They had their match tied at 4-4. And this game, Yusupov as black won in amazing fashion. And it kind of, jump-started him to winning this match against Ivanchuk, who was the heavy favorite, I'd say. Maybe not the heavy favorite, but definitely going into the match was the favorite. And this game, especially for a rapid game, was a really incredible ideas. And it's kind of what happens when you have two extremely creative players playing against each other. Ivanchuk and Yusupov are both creative. They both come up with really interesting ideas. And when two of them play, you can get very interesting chess. But this particular game, I'd say, is definitely one of the nicest games I've seen. And again, a little bit more likely you guys have seen this game before. It's included in several attacking books, I'm sure. But it's still a really beautiful game. And it's one of those where I don't like computers in this game because they definitely ruin it. There were lots of mistakes made. But you have to keep in mind, this was in 1991. This was a rapid match. And the position was immensely complicated. And there are positions where even computers, it takes them a little while. So a game like this, you have to turn off your engine and try to figure things out on your own. We're going to make mistakes. We're not going to see everything perfectly. It's completely impossible. But at the same time, we can still enjoy the chess and enjoy the beautiful ideas. So let's get started. I'm not going to spend too much time in the opening because it's so complex and the game later got so interesting. But it was in English. Slightly weird move order, I would say, but you get kind of a typical position. It's more like a knight d7, king Indian at this point. Ivanchuk decides not to go for e4, but this is also a fairly well-known idea. Again, fairly normal development for both sides. Ivanchuk plays a fairly aggressive move in bishop a3, immediately trying to make this queen feel uncomfortable with life. So again, taking on d4, I'd say, is maybe more typical in playing knight c5. I don't want to say more typical, but maybe safer. But Yusupov decides that he wants to go for a more double-edged position, which is more true to his style. And Ivanchuk never shies away from double-edged positions either, so I'm sure both were fairly happy with this turn of events. Black played e4. So again, we're going to go for a situation where black will be trying to play attacking on the king side, and white will be attacking on the queen side. And yes, you can attack where there's no king. It just doesn't end in checkmate, it ends in taking your opponent's pieces. So, knight g5 was played. So this pawn's now a weakness. d5 is ill-advised due to the hanging queen. So e3 is the move. So I have my first question to my audience, which has grown substantially since my last lecture. Which move would you play here? Now, obviously taking the pawn, queen takes pawn, is bad for a zillion reasons, not least of which is that it's a fork of the king and knight. But also it just opens the king and is just generally undesirable. So allowing pawn takes pawn is almost certainly bad. So you have two candidate moves here. Those being f3 and f4. And I would say that one of these moves I definitely like more than the other. And it was not the move that was played. So I'm curious which of these moves you guys would play. Because again, it's not a completely obvious decision, but I think that clearly one of the moves I prefer over the other. So we have one vote. Let's take a vote. How many want f3? Just from a first impression, without calculating too many variations. Uh-huh. A lot of people have. How many like f4?
Yes, Sarah showed it to us and he called the pawn on e3 a tiger.
A tiger? Yeah, I don't think I use quite the same expressive language as Sarah One does. So, but again, I like this game so much that I could see someone else go over this game. I could go over it and then immediately watch someone else go over it. I like this game so much. But it's also so complex that probably Yasser mentioned many things I didn't mention, and probably I'll mention some things he didn't mention, and very likely he mentioned them in a much slower voice. So can't resist. I had to do it. So between F3 and F4, why do you? Well, let me put it this way. So you've seen the game, so you kind of cheated. That's okay. So I don't judge. Why do you guys like F3?
I haven't seen it, but F3, never played F3. F3 guards E4.
F3 guards E4.
And either of your knights can go E4.
Exactly. And I think this is very important because if you are able to access the E4 square, for example, after F3, knight E4 is a big deal because D6 is a weakness, right? So it looks weird because you're blocking your bishop, but supporting this knight E4 move, I think, is really important. So for example, if knight F8, I'd say either knight to E4 is possible, although it's not even necessary to play it immediately. But for example, if knight E4, bishop F5, queen can drop back. And I'd say in this position, okay, white's pawn structure is a little weird, to put it mildly, but with E5 coming, this being weak, the two bishops looking kind of nice, I'd probably prefer white in most of these positions.
I also have another reason.
Yes?
It stops knight g4 f2.
That's true, but I would say that knight g4 f2 is mainly a problem because a knight can't land here so easily, or plant there. But that's very true. However, having seen the game, hindsight 2020, it's easier to draw these conclusions. But it's important not to do that. You have to try to keep the position kind of like from their perspective during the game. I'm pretty sure Ivanchuk did not realize he was about to be brutally checkmated, or something along these lines. So you have to look at it from the point of view. They're still right out of the opening. They don't know what's going to happen. So, even if you kind of have an idea of how the game's going to transpire, try to look at it from their shoes, exactly how they're going to play. I like F3, supporting knight E4. He played F4. And here, I was going to ask what Yusupov played, but I'm pretty sure you guys know. Oh, it's not knight G4 yet. That was bad. Anyway, he's getting out of the way, so this pawn can be defended if necessary, but also bishop F5 is coming. And this is, again, another reason I don't like what he did, because if you get in bishop F5, this E4 square is better covered from black's perspective. Whereas if you play F3, it supports it a little bit more. So Ivanchuk continues to attack. Again, these moves, you could spend a long time on these moves as well, but this game is so complicated, I want to save most of the analysis for later. Bishop F5 was played, fairly natural. Queen goes to B3. H6. Knight goes back to F3. And now knight G4 comes. So black is basically using this pawn as a spearhead to start the attack. The knight can land on F2. The pawn G5 is going to come. And in fact, G5 could have happened here immediately as well. And this is another very interesting way to play. So for example, just to give you an idea, what would happen if white tries to grab this pawn? Where's this noise coming from? And again, I don't have this line entered, so we're going to explore as if we didn't know what's going to happen, because we don't. So now if I play here, so again, this D6 problem can sometimes come into play, but because the bishop's momentarily blunted, I think it's not going to be so easy. So you might have a move like knight F2 now, for instance. And again, I would say that black has lots of counterplays. So again, maybe white shouldn't be grabbing this pawn. Maybe white should find another move here. B5 is certainly a possibility, just trying to keep at it. And if G4, knight H4, you haven't achieved too much. But I think that this G5 move was maybe worth considering as well. Black opted for knight G4. Ivanchuk, true to form, plays B5. And black plays G5. So it's already entering territory where I'd say white has to be very careful and very precise. And for a while at least, Ivanchuk, at least in my opinion, plays extremely well, considering you're facing such an attack. It's very easy to panic when you face an attack because, no one likes being attacked. But the fact is that sometimes, rather than playing purely defensive moves, you have to come up with ideas for counterplay. Basically, moves that make counter threats, moves that do stuff on the other side of the board, is necessary when you're defending against an attack. But the key is you cannot be slow. Slow play is almost always punished when you're getting attacked. So what move would you guys consider for white here? But yeah, basically, if you take this pawn, then you lose this grip on the square for sure. Not to mention that all of a sudden, then you have to watch out for knight f2 and everything kind of flying at you. So what knight e5 does, he took on c6 first, by the way, because the thing is, you want to be attacking a weak pawn when you play knight e5, right? So he threw this move in before playing it. And this is kind of crucial because you want to be able to play knight takes c6, right? Sometimes, for example, if you play knight e5 too early, there's a possibility that, say, if the queen moves, you don't have time to play knight takes c6. And I might have time to grab your knight. Just as an example. So usually you want to open up lines first and then play knight e5. And again, I really like this move because otherwise, what are you going to do? Like, you can't really break through here that easily. If you play d5, I play c5. If c5, I have d5. So you can't try to open up the queen side. And again, if white can't get queenside counterplay, you're just going to die because this attack's going to eventually crash through. So knight e5 opens up the bishop, threatens knight takes c6, and really the game takes an interesting turn. So black captures on f4. Again, you can't really defend this pawn. And sometimes if you try to defend indefensible things, you end up kind of just wasting time. So he's going to pitch this pawn, but he needs to keep his attack going. Also, takes here has another advantage, apart from just taking a pawn. What have you done that's good for you?
You open up a file?
Well, not yet. There's still quite a few things on this file.
Well, it's going to be open.
Yes. The queen now has a square. If the knight lands on c6 and the queen has to go to some square like f6 and you want into knight d5, you're probably in bad shape, right? And your queen doesn't want to move away and not be able to access the king side. This is a common pattern actually in a King's Indian, that you choose your attacking moves at the right moment because you need your queen to have a square over here in order to keep attacking. So pawn takes pawn, yes, you're capturing a pawn, but you're doing it at a very specific point in order to give your queen this square. So white captures on c6. Looks kind of crazy, but at the same time, you need a way to get counterplay. You need counterplay right now. So if you don't start taking these pawns, you're not going to have any chance. For example, taking this pawn would be near suicide. Any reasons why? Yeah. Now, maybe you could take this knight, but even if you just simply recapture, I think with queen coming in and bishop coming in, it's just going to be really bad. Keep in mind, you only have one defender over here now. So this move, I think, is better. Queen comes out to g5. Maybe, but you're also, keep in mind, first of all, do you want to take one of these rooks? Probably not, right? Because your bishop is one of your only defenders. This is one of the things I've noticed when attacking. If your opponent has one defender, that counts, that's so much better than 0. That seems obvious, but when you have one defender, it's amazing. Sometimes just having a bishop on g2, you can fend off really crazy attacks. And you'll actually see that this game. He has the one defender, and it makes black's attack so much harder. But if you have 0 defenders, a lone king gets checkmated super fast. So giving up this one defender, I'd say, is normally a bad idea. So for example, after bishop takes c6, let's say I even just take this pawn. If you want to take one, first of all, I don't recommend taking one of these rooks, but also keep in mind that now this knight's looser. So here, I might even be able to just take this knight and play simple chess. Something like this. And you can feel free, to take one of these rooks, but after I recapture, your king has 0 defenders. I do not believe it'll last very long. So you have to be very careful about this. Knight takes c6, I think, is very important because it leaves this bishop here, and also it's a tempo move. Something else that's important. Queen here. Ivanchuk takes on d6. This move looks super greedy, but it also serves another purpose. You're not just taking a pawn. What are you doing?
Threatening to play bishop f4.
Exactly. The bishop now participates in defense. So what do you play here if you're black? So in the game, knight g6 was played, which I think is a very logical move. Because, first of all, you're defending this pawn. Defending attacked pieces is usually a good idea. But apart from that, you're bringing another piece to the party. Maybe bishop f8 in some situations will try to get rid of this bishop. And also, you're keeping your options open. Sometimes you might want to take, but other times maybe you'll take on h2. Maybe you'll play queen h5. And knight g6 keeps these options open for you. That's something I was going to mention.
I guess bishop f4 then.
We'll get to that in a moment. But I just wanted to mention that when you're attacking, at some point you have to commit to something. And then usually there's a long line, and either you checkmate, or you lose brutally, or you perpetual check, something like this. But before you go for the throw, before you try to go for the winning line, often you want to keep your options open. The reason for this is that if you have a few different ways you can attack your opponent, they don't know how to set up their defense. They don't know how to kind of keep you at bay. Whereas if you commit to exactly one plan of attack right away, oftentimes they're able to defend against it more easily because they know what your next moves are going to be. When you play knight g6, white still isn't sure if you're going to take here or play queen h5, right? So in that sense, I like this move. But a position like this, of course, is always very concrete, and it requires a precise calculation and thinking because you can't logic a position like this. It's just too much craziness happening. So knight takes h2 was certainly a possibility. And now there are lots of moves. But just to give you an example of how some of these lines can go, king takes h2 I think would be a very bad idea. Because you take, king back here. This would be even, pinning yourself would be even worse because of this. And here, what would you do?
Maybe bishop h3 getting rid of all the
Bishop h3, I don't like as much. Again, I prefer getting the knight in. The reason why, if bishop h3, I have a couple options. First of all, I'm not obligated to take your bishop. I can maybe move away or even put it on f3, and it's not clear this helped you. But I also might consider a move like this. I don't know. This is I'm a little less sure of because maybe you'll play queen h4 and now I'd at least be nervous, let's put it that way. But at the same time, the rook's lined up with the king, so you might find actually giving checkmate not all that easy. But okay, I have a kind of a problem here because you're threatening too much. Yeah, probably I should just move my bishop, say bishop f3. But I like knight g6 because then you're going to bring another piece into the attack. The arrow, this means you have an attack. You ever see this in chess space? The arrow means you have an attack. But the key here is that, again, if you have a choice between just attacking with two pieces and bringing another piece in, almost always you want another piece to come in. Trying to give checkmate with just two pieces is one of the ways people fail to checkmate. And in any case, this would have been an interesting option. But white probably would take on f4, which to me is a more logical move. Why would you take this and allow queen takes g3? But even this is unclear. You play queen h5, the knight comes to d5, and the position is just crazy. I'm threatening to take on e3, I'm threatening knight e7 check, but at the same time, if I bring my knight back, I'm threatening queen h2. Maybe there's no checkmate immediately, but it's definitely threatening. And again, this is just another way you could have gotten insanity. But not to worry, insanity fans. We end up there anyway. Knight g6 was played. Knight d5. So again, you're thinking at first, like, why is white just ignoring all these threats? Well, in order to defend against this onslaught, you need pieces. So knight d5, you're not just attacking a pawn, you're bringing pieces into the attack and defense. Maybe you'll play knight e7 check. Maybe you'll play knight takes f4. But having pieces that are multidimensional is extremely important. The problem white has is that the two rooks and the queen are not participating in the defense. And that can definitely hinder things. So here, black played queen h5. And once again, knight takes h2 was maybe an option to consider. So as I've mentioned, lots of possibilities. So, and this is something to give you an idea of how complex this is. Yusupov, who by the way is very workmanlike in how he looks at chess, annotated this game. And in his annotations, because they were done probably in the 90s, I'd imagine soon after this game was played, he obviously didn't have the use of a computer. There weren't computers back then, never mind strong ones. So he had to analyze all this on his own. So a lot of his conclusions were actually not correct. But when you have a computer, it makes it look very easy. But you have to realize to analyze a position like this without one is very difficult. But let's give it a shot. So let's say king takes h2. How can black attack here? Queen g3. Knight h4 might be possible. And again, keep in mind that in a lot of these lines there's more than one ways. There's not always just one way to skin a cat, as they say. But let's see. If knight h4, how would you defend against knight takes pawn? I might have also had knight e7 check, I should mention. I don't know if throwing that in makes sense, but I'm going to just go with the simpler move. Simpler in quotes.
I would leave the queen where it is.
Bishop e4. So your threat is to take on g2, as well as maybe nothing else. So what else? What if I just capture your bishop here? Rook takes, and then rook g1. I don't know if you're going to give checkmate here. I'm getting pieces into the defense. Your knight and queen are not coordinating very well, I must say. And I have moves like queen b7 hitting the rook and threatening knight e7, and the queen has discoveries galore here. For example, after here, I might just have a much simpler move. Maybe even knight h5 is just good. But a move like queen b7 can be actually kind of nasty, because now I'm threatening your rook, I'm threatening knight e7. You see how your attack kind of grinds to a halt after a couple improvised moves? And again, it's not really a criticism. To play this position is really tough. But queen h4 check and queen f2 check is rather important. So here, you could take a draw, by the way. I feel like I should point this out because, you know, if you already have a draw in hand, it certainly makes your life easier. But I think you can just take this pawn, and now, despite the fact you're still down material, look at these guys. Those pawns are going to be nasty. If they start rolling up the board, I think that it's just going to be over. So white can take this pawn, for example, but now you take, and then you have bishop c2, winning a rook. So this would be an example of a line where white fails to impress. So knight takes f4 is another possibility. And these were the two moves given by Yusupov, incidentally. Knight takes f4 and king takes h2. It turns out neither is best. But just to give you an example, knight takes f4. What would you guys do?
Move the knight to f8.
Well, that's kind of sad.
Well, not f8. I mean, move it pretty much out of the reach of that current knight.
Well, so again,
Maybe h8.
okay, so this kind of thinking I don't like. You're trying to attack, right?
Well,
Do you think you have time for moves like knight
at
f8 and knight
the
h8?
same time.
Hmm?
At the same time, you probably should defend that knight.
Okay, but I would say that almost for sure you don't have time for something like that.
No.
This attack is very time, it's very time dependent, right?
Right.
If you spend a move retreating, that's not only a piece you're bringing away from being a potential attacker, but it's also time. You're spending a move. So I would say that if you're trying to attack, moves like knight f8, and especially, knight h8, I don't know what to say to this one. This one, almost never put your knights in the corner, ever. There actually was a top game in the last year. Yeah, Jabava. And I even gave a lecture on this game where he put a knight on h8. But I'm like, guys, never do this. He only did it actually because it was the only way to not lose a piece. But do not put knights in the corner almost ever. Just not a good idea. Maybe if f7 is the biggest weakness of all time, you can put your knight here. But yeah, so again, don't look for moves that move backwards until you've considered ones that move forwards. Queen g3 should certainly be considered. Knight takes f4 is also possible, but takes here. So if I take on g6. And this is the thing. I think that Yusupov was thinking purely in positional terms. He's like, oh, queen takes bishop. But after queen takes bishop, I think it's not so clear. However, taking this knight is actually just very strong. Because now, I don't have much I can do. For example, let's say bishop takes h2. You have a very simple move. and this guy's just a goner. And if you try knight e7 check, for example, I can just take it because, again, you're getting attacked way too fast. Also note how a8 does not really hang because it's pinned. So really, you're actually already out of options. And if king takes knight, I can simply take this bishop with check, and that position's a lot clearer. But again, when you have this many pieces hanging, it's tough to decide which ones to take. But I would say look for the most straightforward way first, and that's usually a good thing to do. But queen takes g3 is a key move because the fact that you're pinning the bishop is nice, but also it's just you have way too many pieces around the king. So I think bishop takes f4 is actually a better move. And now the lines get super, super cray. Queen h5 is an interesting move, but I don't even want to get into this one. It was too messy. I mean, I'm looking at this position, I'm trying to figure things out, I'm turning on the computer and it's spitting out a bunch of nonsense. Suffice it to say, queen h5 is an interesting move, but to me, the human choice is just taking this bishop, because this bishop is defending this pawn, right? You want to take away your opponent's key defenders almost always. So pawn takes, queen h4. So to me, this looked really strong. But it's amazing how many defensive resources white has. Knight takes e3 is definitely a logical move. You go back to g4, takes on g4, bishop takes. And again, my impression was that this position was actually just unclear. White should go back, blocking the rook. But okay, you can maybe take on e2 at some point, play rook b8, black's king's open. White has a lot of pawns, but at the same time, because this king's so open, because this is a weakness, which probably is going to get taken soon, I'd say that it's at least an unclear position. So this was actually maybe objectively better even than what he played. But what he played was so interesting that in a lot of ways, it was kind of nice he didn't play this. He played queen h5, which is a very direct move, obviously. He wants to put his queen on h2 and scare white a little bit. So white plays h4. Can't really allow it. And again, we come to a situation where it's hard to judge objectively whether his move is absolutely correct or anything like that. But it's such a difficult position to play that, and remember, this is a rapid game. This is a game 60. In all likelihood, they had under 20 minutes here. Imagine having to play this position with no time. You really have to rely on your instincts a lot. You have to be calculating like crazy, but a lot of it you have to rely on attacking instincts. His instinct told him to take on h4. I don't think we should argue with him. He had knight f2 as a move that was really interesting. He had f takes g3. But to me, this is kind of lame, right? And believe it or not, this is actually just a perp. The knight goes back and forth. That would be it would be terrible if the game ended that way, right? Maybe it's objectively better than what he did, but that would be awful. So he takes. We're going to stick to takes. So white actually is not obligated to take this knight immediately, and in my opinion shouldn't. Throwing in this check is actually very annoying. So king h7, it's almost always that this square is bad because it just runs into too much stuff. For example, after takes, this is just really bad because the king, like you can play queen c2 in a lot of positions, exposing the king, and it's just not very good. And you'll see why this is a worse version. So almost always, you have to put your king on h8. Knight takes f4. Knight f3 check, because obviously. But also, I mean, you need a move, right? If you go here, I can probably even just take your knight. So knight f3 check, pawn takes, queen check. And now, rook takes e7 is the main move. If you play queen takes g3, I have this one. And it's one of the reasons why against king h7, you actually just take the knight, by the way. So instead, rook takes e7, pawn takes g4. And again, yeah, there are lots of possibilities here. But taking the rook would make no sense, because then I take on g3, right? And you're again going to get checkmated, probably. So you take this knight to eliminate some pieces, e2 check. And this is actually one of the key things. And this is where the computer is so strong, because it just sees whether there's checkmates or not. After takes, you can just play queen f3. Cold-blooded. Rook's attacked, rook's defended, defending against mates.
Yeah.
So you take here. So now to make sure every piece is hanging.
Oh.
Oh no.
Oh.
And believe it or not, there's no clear checkmate. You can do this, but it's actually unclear whether you have anything here. And in fact, again, from a human perspective, I would say that this would be kind of annoying to play for white just because your king's wide open. And I'd say a lot of games would end in perpetual or something like that. Computer actually likes white here. I'm guessing just because this pawn can start rolling eventually. But again, human perspective, this is kind of ridiculous.
Wait, what if you play
Knight f4 instead of knight e7? Here?
Yeah.
I think if you do this first, let me see a moment. So what if I check now? Takes, check, and then what if I play queen takes pawn and say, ha, no discovery?
Oh, so good.
See why knight e7 check was so important? Because now this knight can't move with tempo, which means this checkmate will be very painful.
So no, like,
You can play queen b2, but now I can distract you with this move.
oh.
I also maybe had knight h2 check, but I like this one better. So you have to cover this square, you have to take with the queen. And then I probably will just capture, but anyway. So you can see how many pitfalls there are in a position like this. In any case, white took immediately, and he took. This move was actually quite interesting. With the idea that after check, king h8, queen takes h4, bishop back, and probably black has nothing better than a draw here.
But that wouldn't be fun.
I know. That's why he didn't play it. He's like, forget that. And here, white has a choice between which knight do I check on e7 with?
He chose the wrong one.
Maybe. Nice try.
It really technically doesn't matter because both knights are defended.
That's true. But there are different ways to think about this. So both knights are defended. So if rook takes e7 is the next move, it doesn't matter which knight. You're absolutely correct. But you can assume rook takes e7 is probably not coming, right? So then how do you decide the difference between knight de7 and knight ce7?
Which one's more important as a defender?
That's a big part, but I try to simplify this question. Do you like this knight better or this knight better? Which knight is more useful?
I like d5.
Why d5?
Because it's closer to the king side.
Yep.
Yeah, that's simple. It's closer to the king side. It hits this pawn, hits this pawn. Now, Ivanchuk is not a weak player. Even with no time, the dude sees amazing stuff. So I'm sure he had a concrete reason. By concrete, I mean he calculated tons of lines and saw a reason why knight de7 check was better. But in this case, it was just better to be like, look, this knight is actually helping me defend. This knight can actually help me do stuff. I should move the knight on c to e7. So bishop takes f4 is another move. We're not even going to mess with that one. But knight ce7 check was very possible. As we know, the king should almost always go to h8. Here it's just too open. Knight takes f5. And again, the position is still kind of nuts. After check, there's this move. So here's the deal. In this position, black has absolutely nothing with this knight here. There's no queen here, there's no nothing. There's only one way black can generate a threat. Now, for those of you who've seen this game, you know how. So I want you to maybe not answer this one. But for those of you who have not seen this game, how can black generate a threat here? You need another piece, that's clear. But before we get into why bishop e5 is such a stunning move, and then eventually why maybe it doesn't quite work, as they thought it did in the annotations, how can black generate a threat here? There's only one way to do it. Again, the knight and queen are not enough to checkmate by themselves.
Queen shouldn't even move.
It can't move. It'd love to move to g3, right?
Right.
But it can't, because the knight on f5 is such a monster. It also doesn't hurt that it's an extra knight, but
You gotta get a rook into the game somehow.
But here's the question. What will your threat be?
Way to kill the fun.
I didn't mean to do that.
Not talking. You shouting the answer out.
Okay, but how? So, if you get your rook into the game, what threat can you create? That's my question. G2 might hang, that's true. But this is actually truly the most amazing part of this game. It was the mate threat that was generated. It was really cool looking. So let me just show you after bishop e5. So this move looks nonsensical, especially if you don't see the idea. It's completely ridiculous. Very nice. So for those of you looking for this pattern, so bishop takes e5 is actually what's given in the notes. But now you sack. And by the way, the reason you play bishop e5 is just to prevent a capture on f4. Because capture on f4 ruins your attack, right? So bishop e5 is interference. And the idea is that if bishop takes, you sacrifice another exchange and play here. However, the threat of queen h1 check is monstrous and very difficult to get rid of, to parry. Like, how do you stop queen h1 check? It's really difficult. So the funny thing is, so here's the deal. In this position, in the notes, it's basically given as, yeah, you can take on e3 and lose. You can do this and lose. There's actually a defense to queen h1 check here. And I'd like you guys to find it. It's nuts, though. You have to use your creative juices here. If knight g3, I think that after queen takes g3, you can probably resign. And if knight takes knight takes e3, I just capture. Queen f4 check. Take here, and you're going to end up losing. For example, yeah. Queen here is going to be mate. And if you go to f2, then I check here. And after here, knight takes d1 is actually double checkmate. Although I should point out you don't get 2 points for that. You just get 1 point for the checkmate.
Knight f4 is also double checkmate, right?
Yes, it is. But you don't take a rook, so it's not as good.
Yeah, I read the answer on accident.
That's okay. That does make it easier to spot, because it's really hard to spot it. But basically, what are moves that block this file? Imagine trying to find this move in a chess game. But you guys don't see how it works yet, right? Because, okay, king takes, it's kind of obvious because you're blocking the file, right? So, for example, if king takes g7, you play knight f6. If f3, you take. And this is where things get really nuts. Takes, and you just run. There are some positions, by the way, you can actually play king e1 here and give up the world because you're up so much. And this is the thing. When you're up so much material as Ivanchuk took this game, you can actually, the advantage of doing this when you're defending. Now, you think that you can't be too greedy sometimes. If you take a lot of material and get checkmated, you don't get extra points. However, what extra material lets you do is, if you have to pitch a rook and a bishop, everything to get out of checkmate, sometimes you can. If you're up a rook and 5 bishops, for example, and you have to give up a rook and 4 bishops to prevent checkmate, you can do it. And you'll still be up that extra bishop. So, you can basically pitch everything. And apparently, this is a draw.
I can believe that. Yeah.
Don't take my word for it, but, you know. And there's no way to checkmate this king. I couldn't believe it. I tried everything. The computer was just like, ha, 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 moving the king around in circles, and there's just nothing to do. I tried this, but unfortunately, the king even hides on b1, and it's a perpetual check. By the way, it's important you don't mess it up, though. If you play here, now there's no more perpetual. But when you go to g6, exactly. So the queen has to go back, you go back, ha, 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 etc. Quite a line, huh?
Maybe forced to draw by repetition.
Yeah. However, rook takes would have made more sense to me. Oops. Yeah.
Taking them by surprise that it was a king take.
So yeah, if rook here, you can often sack. But if here, queen b1, pretty sick, huh? It's pretty messed up. By the way, long distance queen moves, very difficult to see for some reason. So something you have to keep in mind when you're looking at games. Queen h4 was another possibility. And then takes. But yeah, queen h4, you play king g1. That was the one thing.
People might have a hard time seeing long distance queen moves might be because some people might confuse the queen and the king for a split second.
That might be possible, but it's more that because queens are so scary looking when they're close, I think that you don't realize they can move real far. Again, I don't know why this is, but it's just one of those geometric things. So yeah, rook g6, you can just go here, because notice how there's no more checkmate because your rook's pinned. Sorry.
Wait, so when the queen's on b8, can you play rook g8?
You can, and then I take it and go here. And then your fun is over, because I'm going to take.
Oh, you're up to these material.
I hate to end your fun, I really do. But in any case, knight g7, quite a move, huh?
Yeah.
But imagine having to find this with like 2 minutes. Ivanchuk, by the way, one of the few people who might find that move. But unfortunately, d takes e5 couldn't really crack. So at first you're like, rook g8, queen h2 is coming, I'm in business. Go me. But white can actually defend against this somehow, miraculously. How to do so? You have to take. No other move. So there are two possibilities. If f takes, again, keep in mind, what's the threat? Mm-hmm. I'll just take it. You won't be able to defend for long. Knight e3, then I probably have queen f4 again and taking everything with check. And then laughing. Maybe not laughing, but taking everything.
e6.
Uh-oh. So now if you try to be like, I got this checkmate, unfortunately. And now you're down a little too much material.
You're down a lot of material.
And you just don't have anything now. So
what if the pawn took f7?
Sorry, this is f7.
Yeah, what if that pawn when it was at e6 took f7?
But it doesn't really matter. The whole point is that as long as you don't get checkmated here, the game is over because white's just up way too much material. Taking an f7 is maybe a move that's coming next, but as long as there's no checkmate, black just loses. Because black's, look at it. White has an extra knight and bishop, right? Mm-hmm. It's way too much. So knight takes, at first I thought this might be winning, but then I realized white has this move.
Yeah.
Defending the bishop long range. Long range queen. Always the killer. And there's just nothing. So this would have spoiled the whole attack.
Godspeed.
But white played knight d7 check. And you'd think, well, how big a difference can it really make? But the fact that you don't have this sack is actually very annoying. So check. And here, because f4 is not attacked, another problem, you're not required to be like, yeah, bishop e5, party. You don't have to give away all your pieces, basically. And here, he found this move, rook e6, which again is part of his beautiful idea of rook g6. But bishop f6 would have been very strong. But here's the question. What exactly is the purpose of bishop f6? Rook g8 is maybe one idea. But it's very primitive looking, right? But if the bishop lands on f2, you're going to have a real hard time stopping mate. Think of it like a bug house game. If you could drop a bishop on f2, mate's coming, right? Or a pawn on f2. But that's a little less realistic in chess. Bishop on f2, though, is actually quite possible. So bishop h4 to f2 is coming. So for example, if c5, actually, yeah, if white just plays like a, c5 is kind of like a just improving move. I'm just using it as an example. Now rook g8 is the killer with queen h1 as the idea. Bam. Such a beautiful checkmate, right?
Yeah.
I just like looking at it, to be perfectly honest.
You can give away your bishop to me.
Let's settle down. But yeah, it's a really pretty checkmate, right? But let's say they play rook d3. So now if you try rook g8, I can sack. And again, keep in mind, I'm up lots of material, so I can afford to sack. And again, this pin is coming back to bite you. So bishop h4, I have to sack anyway, and you don't care. e4, only move, I have to stop queen g1 mate, right? And it looks pretty killer. Again, white can maybe fight on, but good luck trying to defend this position, especially with no time. So bishop f6 would have been really strong, but he played rook e6. Again, he liked this rook g6 idea. And white played queen b7, which looks like a perfectly normal move, but it turns out to lose kind of spectacularly. After knight ce7, which is a better move, there are lots of different options. Bishop f6 now is too slow because of queen b7 again. And note how you're not only threatening to bring the queen back, but queen takes rook is a mate threat. It's not just a rook threat, which is important. When your opponent's trying to give you checkmate, sometimes taking even a rook doesn't matter. But if you can then give checkmate, that does matter. Sounds basic, but rook takes e7. So rook takes d6 doesn't work because you simply take it. And now, by the way, knight takes f7 and queen c2 is a mate threat again. So giving your opponent a mate threat is a bad idea, is what this comes down to. So rook takes e7 is a better move. And now there are two ways to capture the rook, as I'm sure you see. So if bishop takes, it allows f3. But, and this is where his analysis was bad. He only gave takes, and you take a bunch of stuff. Maybe you say in the game, right? However, believe it or not, you're up so much material, you can give away the world. And somehow, white's doing well here because you parry all the threats. Up in exchange, no, you're not up in exchange. You're up one pawn, but black's attack is gone. And look at this pawn, by the way. Look at these pawns. They're just so strong. The knight is amazing. So despite the fact your king is a little breezy, you actually are good here. But again, this is stuff which computer can tell you. A human being, to actually calculate this during a game, there's no way. The only way you can do it is calculate as much as you can, follow some basic principles, try to get your king safe, at least as much as humanly possible. But to try to see all this is very difficult. But again, I just, a lot of pretty tactics, yeah?
What happened in the game?
We're going to get to that. I wasn't going to not show you. I'm a little bit mean, but come on. And yeah, if knight takes, then the queen is allowed g3, which is a problem. So queen b7, it looks like a good move, right? You're attacking the rook. If the rook moves to g8, you can play knight e7, defending the bishop, hitting the rook, defending this. You're a hero. But black found something even more heroic. And again, one of the truly inspired ideas in this game. Which move do you have in mind? Very nice. There are times when you have to be more conservative. You have to be like, okay, a piece is attacked, I got to move it and then continue my attack. But there are times when one tempo matters more than a rook or even than a queen. Obviously, it's not very common. But in this attack, one tempo means everything. If you don't attack with the right amount of time, you're going to end up just losing. You're going to end up getting your pieces taken, your attack's going to fail. Rook g6. Truly, like, an amazing move. You're basically saying you can take a rook, not only take a rook with check, meaning you lose 0 time taking this rook. But my attack is so strong, queen h1 is such a difficult threat, you're just going to lose. However, Ivanchuk actually found an amazing way to defend against this threat. I was going to ask people who didn't know, but nice job. How did he do that? Someone? Other than someone who knows? I knew that was the danger in showing this game, but it's one of my favorite games. So I was like, all right, I'm going to show it. Knight
ce7?
So knight ce7 looks like a nice move. Threatening mate, right? Defending your bishop. However, defending your bishop does not defend against the beautiful mate threat. So I give checkmate first. Now you... Oops.
Bishop d2.
Now you can try playing queen g8 and giving checkmate in response, but your computer won't let you do it. Yeah, there's no two checkmates in a row.
Queen G8 here?
Yeah.
You can't.
So if knight takes e3, I simply take with the knight and take at, yeah, and this move I liked actually. Instead of taking the bishop with check or doing anything like that, you take here with which purpose? Yeah, so the king can't escape. You're like, no king, you're not running anywhere. I kind of like this knight takes c4 move. It's very sadistic. But anyway, it's not the only win, but it's my favorite. Queen g8. Easy to miss a move like this, no? But keep in mind, you can't miss moves like this. The main reason is that you've given away almost your whole army.
That would be checkmate too.
Which?
Oh.
Yeah, it's all right. But yeah, I mean, queen g8 is not mate, but the whole idea is that white's up so much material, the game is not over just because they lose their queen. Think about it. In this position, before you play queen g8, how much material is white up?
A lot.
A rook and 2 pieces. You could give up a whole queen and still be up material. Think about this. A rook and 2 pieces are worth more than a queen, which means you can give up a whole queen and still be up. That's why it's so dangerous to sack all your pieces. Not just because if you don't mate, you lose, but because your opponent can give back so much to hinder your attack. So you can't miss moves like this. But of course, Yusupov saw this, and his idea was that he can still attack even without his rook. So this happened. So what's material here?
White's got
Two rooks and a piece.
2 rooks, a bishop, and a knight.
two rooks and a piece
For a queen.
and a pawn.
2 rooks for a bishop. And what's the pawn count here? Black's up a pawn.
Yeah.
So black has a queen and pawn for 2 rooks and a bishop. Who's up?
White.
White, by a little bit. However, white's still getting attacked, and that's what makes this difficult. By the way, it's important that now the knight can't stay here because it's going to create extra threats. So white takes the bishop, and what does black do?
Takes the knight.
So again, it's important you don't automatically capture pieces.
Sure.
If you take this knight, you give white another move to maybe get out of some threats, meaning that maybe they activate their rook. Maybe they play, so he played here actually, which is quite a move. Not the first move you'd expect, right? But his idea is that if you play here, king g1, you actually have no way to checkmate because you can't really threaten this bishop. It's very annoying.
Draw.
You can draw, but he still had no intention of drawing.
I'd be happy with a draw.
Well, you're no Ivanchuk. I mean, you're no Yusupov.
You're not playing the mechanics.
So after king g7, the problem is that maybe this move would be annoying. The idea being that if you try to checkmate me now, I might have an escape route. It looks kind of sad, I agree. But you don't want to give your opponent a chance to escape. His idea was, even though I could take this knight back, I still want to be attacking. He only has 2 pieces. You're thinking, what kind of a lunatic attacks with 2 pieces? Well, the kind of lunatic who's dealing with this king. Also, your pawns are so good here, I would say your pawns count as attacking pieces. So knight f2 is quite a move. And what's the threat of knight f2, by the way?
The rook.
The rook is the least of the worries.
No.
If you take the rook and white takes back,
Yeah.
you're still down material, right? And your attack's gone almost.
Pretty much.
Your main idea is to play either knight h3, threatening this mate, and if takes, then mate, or to play knight e4, the idea being if takes, you mate on f2. So just to show you,
Knight h1.
so if rook a b1, for example, knight h3,
Knight h1.
knight h1 is actually not so bad, but this is a very simple checkmate, right? Because you can just take here. This move is a bit better. And here, this is actually a better choice. The main reason being that I'm going to try to run if you don't do this. And now, trying to run doesn't do me much good
Because you don't get very far.
because you could say, no, 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 no. And now queen f2 is inevitable. So he played bishop takes f4, the only move available. Queen takes f4. But even though white's still up material, black's still attacking. So he played knight e6. Rook db1 was kind of interesting. And how would you guys play here?
Knight d3.
I just take the knight now. It's simplest.
Well, if you take the knight, you give me a chance to maybe give a check, right?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
then I run my king to h4.
Really?
I don't see anything wrong with it.
Well, first of all, I can't check you here, so you don't have to run that much. But I just don't see, like, if I blew my queen king, say I go here,
I guess queen g3.
but I still don't see your checkmate. If you go knight h3, I'll play king here. If you go knight here, I sit. And maybe I'll play rook f1 on you. I don't know.
Then I'll play king g5.
Okay. I mean, maybe this is possible, but I'm still not sure you're going to give checkmate here.
Yeah.
Right? Not so easy. So I would say that...
Just be buying time.
Right. So I would say also, keep in mind that this knight is not that significant, right? This knight actually blocks a rook check. So it's not even such a big deal. You just have to continue to make threats. So knight h3 check, queen h4 check is the key move. The idea being that now if you go back, there's mate. And if king d1,
I guess. Yeah.
notice how you're not taking anything. You're just grabbing pawns everywhere.
Yeah, even though it's
Pretty much
Yeah.
eliminating all hope for him of getting a piece back.
Yeah. And keep in mind, these rooks are not exactly prized possessions here.
And
So-
even in that pawn right there in front of that at
e3?
A2,
Oh, yeah.
it can't move far if you keep that pawn at a7 because it'll get blocked on a6.
That's very true. This pawn is not going to be very significant. So he played knight e6, which makes more sense. He goes back to h2 saying, whatever, I'm going to play knight h3 next anyway. Ha 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 ha. I don't know if he actually laughed like that during the game, but... So he plays rook db1. And now?
He probably
just
did
play h5. If you're taking an escape square.
So h5, giving your king an escape square. However, you also give your opponent a checking square.
Then king h6.
Sure, but I'm not so sure you actually wanted to do this. Now I have knight f3, for example. I have knight e4 in some positions, not here, obviously. But I can play knight f3.
Keep your king at h7 and keep your pawns in those positions.
Well, you want to keep the pawn here just to stop
Yeah,
knight
that
g5
one
check.
pawn, you can feel free to move.
But the question is, how do you get out of perpetual? It's actually not so difficult, by the way.
You just play g5 then, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because if he takes it, you just take the knight.
There's no perpetual, is there?
There actually isn't.
Someone's paying attention.
The queen's on h2.
Yes, the queen, long distance queen moves, guys.
Oh.
Covers b8. There's no perpetual, which means...
Just play knight h3.
Knight h1.
Why are you trying to be fancy with it? Threaten mate in 1. Rook check.
It's so happy.
So,
Good.
takes the knight. What else? And now?
Mate.
How?
Move queen back to b2.
Ah, this is b2. That doesn't threaten mate.
No, I mean, yeah,
g3 or
h2.
h2.
You can go to h2, but I think h2 is actually a big mistake. Because now I go back to g2, and I don't see how you're going to checkmate.
Yeah.
If you try to go to h4 here, I play here, and I think the best you can hope for is a draw now.
Yeah.
Because, I just have way too much material.
Hmm.
So you got to put the king in a box right away.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Just play queen g3 then. You can't run it either.
See how the king has no squares now?
yeah.
And there's no way to block it. So queen f2 is going to happen next move.
I see.
So you see the idea? That
I see.
queen f2 is coming no matter what. There's no checks, so it's just resigns. And that's key. The reason why, now in this position, obviously white could play another move and last a few extra moves. But really, if the queen comes back, you're going to lose anyway. The reason why he took on h3 is because now black only has one move to win. And it's important, especially if you play such a glorious attacking game, that you don't get careless for the last move and put your queen on h2, thinking, ah ha ha ha, I'm going to win. And then after bishop g2, you have no more way to give checkmate. Keep in mind, you only have a queen now. There are not that many ways you can give checkmate with just one piece. So you need to make sure that you spot queen g3 and be precise till the last moment. So again, I mean, it's such a messy game. We actually didn't even cover half of the variations I looked at. It's such a crazy game. But I like this game just because the ideas are really beautiful, at least to me. But also because it teaches you lots of things. The long distance queen move, definitely a theme in this game. Keeping the knight on d5. Notice how many more defensive resources you had just by checking with the right knight. If you check with the c knight, the knight on d5 is such a great defensive piece. And just so many ideas that when you're taking tons of material on the defensive side, you have to always look for giving that material back. often giving lots of it back, as we saw in this case. And also just, the different ways to attack. You have to discover exactly what your mate threat is. Black's attack would have come to a grinding halt without the rook threatening this queen h1, knight h2, beautiful checkmate. Without that checkmating idea, not only was it pretty, it was necessary. Without that idea, there was no attack, or at least not a very effective one. But most of all, it's just kind of a cool game, and I like going over it periodically. So it's very likely someone else will choose this for a lecture, but again, I could look at this game again and again. So I hope you guys enjoyed the game.